43. 10. S36. 20, 21. The fourth commandment stated, remembering the Sabbath day to hold it sacred, you are to render service and you must do all your work 6 days. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to Jehovah your God. You must not do any work, you nor your son nor your daughter, your slave man nor your slave girl, nor your domestic animal nor your alien resident who is inside your gates. Acts 20. 8-10. By their holding this day as holy to Jehovah, all, even the slaves and the domestic animals, would have the benefit of refreshing rest. The Sabbath day also provided opportunity to concentrate on spiritual matters without distraction. The fifth commandment, honor your father and your mother, may be viewed as linking together the first four, which define man's duties toward God, and the remaining commandments, which set forth man's obligations towards fellow creatures. For since parents serve as God's representatives, by keeping the fifth command one is honoring and obeying both the Creator and those creatures upon whom God has conferred authority. This command was the only one of the 10 with a promise attached. In order that your days may prove long upon the ground that Jehovah your God is giving you. Acts 20. 12. D5. 16. F6. 2, 3. The next commandments in the code were stated very tersely. The sixth, you must not murder. The seventh, you must not commit adultery. The eighth, you must not steal. Acts 20. 13-15. This is the way these laws are listed in the Masoretic text. From laws dealing with crimes causing the greatest harm to one's neighbor to the one causing the least, in that order. In some Greek manuscripts Codex Alexandrinus, Codex Ambrosianus the order is murder, theft, adultery. Philo the Decalogue, 12:51 has adultery, murder, theft. The Codex Vaticanus, adultery, theft, murder. Going next from deeds to words, the ninth says, you must not testify falsely as a witness against your fellow man. Acts 20. 16. The 10th commandment O textui acute miritra longo, Teraphim 1087 10th against coveting his house, and so forth. Augustine sought to support his theoretical division on the later parallel listing of the Decalogue at Deuteronomy 5. 6-21, where two different Hebrew words in verse 21 are found. Neither must you desire form of heb. Mad. Neither must you selfishly crave form of heb. Wa, rather than on the earlier text in Exodus 20. 17, where just the one verb desire occurs twice. There are other minor differences in the wording between the parallel enumerations of the 10 Commandments in Exodus and Deuteronomy, but these in no way affect the force or the meaning of the laws. Whereas, in the former listing, the 10 words are stated in formal legislative style, its later repetition is more narrative in form, for on the latter occasion Moses was merely rehearsing God's commandment in the way of a reminder. The 10 words also appear elsewhere in still other variations, for they were often quoted or cited along with other instructions by Bible writers of both the Hebrew and Christian Greek scriptures. Acts 31. 14. 34. 14, 17, 21. 19. 3, 11, 12. D4. 15-19. 6. 14, 15. Mount 5. 27. 15. 4. Lu 18. 20. Row 13. 9. F6. 2, 3. The 10 words were God-given, hence comprise a perfect law code. When a man versed in the law asked Jesus Christ, Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus quoted a command that, in effect, epitomized the first 4 or possibly 5 of the 10 commandments, saying, You must love Jehovah your God with your whole heart and with your whole soul and with your whole mind. The rest of the Decalogue, Jesus then summed up in the few words of another command. You must love your neighbor as yourself. Mount 22. 35-40. D6. 5. D19. 18. Christians not under Decalogue. Jesus was born under the law, and he kept it perfectly, finally giving up his life as a ransom for mankind. 4. 1 Joe 2. 2 Furthermore, by his death on the torture stake, he freed those under the law, including the basic 10 words or commandments, by becoming a curse instead of them. His death provided for the blotting out of the handwritten document, it being nailed to the torture stake. 3. 13. Col 2. 13, 14. Nevertheless, a study of the law with its 10 words is essential for Christians, for it reveals God's viewpoint of matters, and it had a shadow of the good things to come, of the reality that belongs to the Christ. Heb 10. 1. Col 2. 17. Ge 6. 2 Christians are not without law toward God, but under law toward Christ. 1 Co 9. 21 But they are not condemned as sinners by that law, for the undeserved kindness of God through Christ provides forgiveness for their errors due to fleshly weakness. Row 3. 23, 24. Tetrah possibly from the Babylonian, meaning ibex. 1. Abraham's father, the 8th generation from Shem. Lu 3. 34. Ge 11. 10-24. 1 Ch1. 24-26 Terah, through his sons Abraham, Nahor, and Haran, became a forefather of numerous tribes. Ge 11. 27. 22. 20-24. 25. 1-4, 13-15. 1 Ch1. 28-42. 2. 1, 2 Terah began having children at 70. While Abraham is listed first, this appears to be because he is the most famous of Terah's sons rather than the firstborn. When Terah died at 205, Abraham was only 75, so Terah must have been 130 when Abraham was born. Ge 11. 26, 32. 12. 4 Sarah was Abraham's half-sister, likely a daughter of Terah by a different wife. Ge 20. 12 Terah's firstborn was most likely Haran, whose daughter was old enough to marry Terah's other son Nahor. Ge 11. 29. Terah lived in Ur of the Chaldeans, and there his family grew up. Ge 11. 28 According to Joshua 24. 2. Terah at one time worshipped gods other than Jehovah, perhaps the moon god Sin, the favored deity of Ur. Nonetheless, when Jehovah called Abraham to leave Ur, Terah's family went along to Haran, where they all lived until after his death about 1943 BCE. Ge 11. 31, 32. Acts 7. 2-4. 2. One of the camps isotextoi acute miritra longo, Turish 1088 respect to inheritance rights would also explain why Laban was so anxious to recover them, even to the point of taking his brothers with him and pursuing Jacob for a distance of 7 days' journey. Ge 31. 19-30 Of course, what Rachel had done was completely unknown to Jacob. Ge 31. 32, and there is no indication that he ever attempted to use the teraphim to gain the inheritance from Laban's sons. Jacob had nothing to do with idols. At the latest, the teraphim would have been disposed of when Jacob had all the foreign gods turned over to him by his household under the big tree that was close to Shechem. Ge 35. 1-4. In Israel the idolatrous use of teraphim existed in the days of the judges as well as the kings. Ge 17. 5. 18. 14, 17, 20. Ho 3. For it is not likely, though, that the teraphim served for purposes of inheritance in Israel, in view of God's express command against the making of images. X 20. For also, the prophet Samuel spoke of teraphim in parallel with uncanny power, comparing the use of both to pushing ahead presumptuously. 1 Sa 15. 23. And the teraphim were among the appendages of idolatry cleared out of Judah and Jerusalem by faithful King Josiah. 2 Chi 23. 24 Hence, the fact that Michal, the wife of David, had a teraphim image among her possessions suggests that her heart was not complete with Jehovah, and that David either did not know about her having the teraphim image or else tolerated it because she was the daughter of King Saul. 1 Sir 19. 12, 13. Teresh. One of two doorkeepers in the Persian palace who conspired against King Ahasuerus. Upon learning of the plot, Mordecai informed Queen Esther who, in turn, revealed it to the king. Teresh and his accomplice were hanged on a stake, and the incident was entered in the royal records. As 2. 21-23. 6. 1, 2. Tertius from Lat. Meaning third. The writer or transcriber of Paul's letter to the Romans, and the only one of Paul's secretaries identified by name. Tertius inserts his own personal greetings to the Romans. Row 16. 22. Datullus Tullas from Lat. Diminutive of Tertius. A public speaker who presented the Jews' case against Paul before Governor Felix in Caesarea. Of what Luke recorded, much of Datullus' statement personally praises Felix, with only a very brief accusation against Paul, attempting to implicate him with the frequent seditions against Rome. Act 24. 1-8 Nothing definite is known as to Datullus' nationality, whether Jewish or Roman. Testicles. Male genital glands. God's law to Israel barred from the priesthood a man having his testicles broken, as one of several disqualifying physical defects. Law 21. 17-21, 23 This high standard for the priesthood was in harmony with the holiness of the office of the priests as representatives of Jehovah's holiness before Israel. It likewise accords with the fact that Israel's priesthood symbolized the heavenly priesthood of Christ and his congregation of under-priests, among whom there is found no blemish. Heb 7. 26. F5. 27. Re 14. 1, 5. 20. 6 Furthermore, God wanted priests who could have children to succeed them. The law provided, however, that such a defective person could eat of the holy things provided for the sustenance of the priesthood. Law 21. 21, 22. For similar reasons an animal having its testicles squeezed, crushed, cut off, or pulled off could not be offered up as a sacrifice. Law 22. 24. Compare Mal 1. 6-8. 1p1. 19. On this account the Israelites did not castrate their animals, for the law required that all domestic animals slaughtered for food be brought to the sanctuary to be killed and eaten as a communion offering. The same law applied in the Promised Land for those who did not live far off from Jerusalem. Law 17. 3-5. 12. 20-25. The law further read, no man castrated by crushing the testicles or having his male member cut off may come into the congregation of Jehovah. De 23. One such o textoi acute miritra longo, there bears 1089 way the marriage could still be fruitful, her husband's family line being carried on through it. In the case of the Christian congregation, persons who have been castrated are not barred from entry, for the law has been set aside on the basis of Christ's sacrifice. Col 2. 13, 14 Nevertheless, the laws above quoted illustrate God's regard for the reproductive organs and strongly indicate that an operation that would destroy a person's procreative powers simply because he has no appreciation for that gift from God would be wrong. Genital organ. The Hebrew word for flesh basar is used in the scriptures at Leviticus 15. 2, 3 with reference to the man's genital organ, the penis, as separate from the testicles. See clean, cleanness. Compare Isa 57. 8, FTN. The male genital organ was an object of sex worship by pagans in ancient times, as it is today in some countries. Reference may be made at Ezekiel 8. 17 NW, FTN to such worship as infecting the apostate Israelites in Ezekiel's day. Thad is Thad middle. Deus. An apostle of Jesus Christ. Mount 10. 2, 3. Mr. 3. 18 He appears to be called elsewhere Judas the son of James. Lu 6. 16. Job 14. 22. Ac 1. 13. See Judas No. 3. Theatre. A structure referred to by the Greeks as the Amidaldatron, where dramatic performances, tragedies, comedies, dances, musical presentations, and spectacles were staged. The theatre was often the scene of immoral presentations, shunned by faithful Christians. F5. 3-5 But it also served as a place of public assembly for other purposes. It was to the theatre in Ephesus that Paul's travelling companions were brought when Demetrius the silversmith stirred up riot against these Christian missionaries. Though the apostle was willing to go before the people assembled in the theatre, the disciples and some friendly commissioners of festivals and games dissuaded him. Act 19. 23-31. Theatres were constructed in Greece from about the 5th century BCE onward, and in time they were built in various principal cities. Most Greek theatres were constructed in semicircular fashion on a hillside of concave formation. The seats might have been made of wood or stone. Aisles separated them into sections, and they were lined up in tiers on the hill's gradual incline. At the centre was the or middle.khe dancing or chorus area, behind which there was a raised stage backed by SKE middle.ne, or background. Ruins of theatres have been found in such places as Ephesus, Athens, and Corinth. The large theatre excavated at Ephesus had 66 rows of seats and could hold an audience of about 25,000 persons. The acoustics were, and still are, so good that even a low voice from the stage can be heard in the topmost row with ease. The Romans frequently constructed theatres as individual buildings dependent upon no natural sloping ground formation. Sometimes their theatres had a roof over the stage and a portion of the seating area. Another type, the Roman amphitheatre, was a roofless circular or oval structure that enclosed a large centre space or arena, from which the seats radiated in tiers. The partially standing Colosseum in Rome, finished in AD CE, is a noted Roman amphitheatre. Herod the Great constructed theatres in various cities, including Damascus and Caesarea. Josephus said that Herod built a theatre in Jerusalem, and after that a very large amphitheatre in the plain. Jewish Antiquities, 15, 268-8, 1. The Greek word the amidaldatron can denote either the place where a show is presented or the theatrical spectacle itself. Paul wrote, "For it seems to me that God has put us the apostles last on exhibition as men appointed to death, because we have become a theatrical spectacle, the amidaldatron, to the world, and to angels, and to men." 1 Co 4. 9 Paul thus alluded to the customary closing event of Roman gladiatorial contests in the amphitheatre arena, when certain participants were brought out on cladotex to acute muritra longo. Theophilus 1090. His attendant put him to death so that no one could say, "It was a woman that killed him." JG 9. 50-54. 2 Sir 11. 21. Thebes is tentatively connected with modern Tubas, about 15 kilometers 9.5 mi of Shechem, although no suitable remains have been found. Theophilus, the middle dot of a middle dot plus, loved by God. Friend of God. The person to whom Luke addressed both his Gospel and the Acts of Apostles. Luke 1. 3, 4. Act 1. 1. His being called most excellent may indicate a high position of some kind, or it may simply be an expression of high esteem. Theophilus apparently was a Christian, having been orally taught about Jesus Christ and his ministry. Luke's written statement served to assure him of the certainty of what he had learned previously by word of mouth. Thessalonians, letters to the 2 inspired letters of the Christian Greek scriptures, perhaps the first to be composed by the Apostle Paul, who identifies himself as the writer of both. 1th 1. 1. 2. 18. 2th 1. 1. 3. 17. At the time these letters were committed to writing, Silvanus, Silas and Timothy were with Paul. 1th 1. 1. 2th 1. 1. This points to Corinth as the place from which the letters were sent, as there is no record that all three men labored together again after their stay at Corinth in the course of Paul's second missionary journey. Act 18. 5. Since the Apostles' 18-month activity in Corinth appears to have begun in the autumn of 50 CE, likely it was at about this time that the first letter was written to the Thessalonians. Act 18. 11. See chronology, the later apostolic period. The second letter must have followed or not long thereafter, probably about 51 CE. In all outstanding catalogues of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries CE, both letters are listed as canonical. They also harmonize fully with the rest of the scriptures in admonishing God's servants to maintain fine conduct at all times. Noteworthy, too, is the emphasis placed on prayer in these letters. Paul, along with his fellow workers, always remembered the Thessalonians in prayer. 1 2 2 13 2 3 11 2 13, and the apostle encouraged them. Pray incessantly. In connection with everything give thanks. 1 5 17, 18 Brothers, continue in prayer for us. 1 5 25 2 3 1. Encouragement and counsel to a relatively new congregation written by Paul about 50 CE, a few months after he had left Thessalonica, because of mob violence. Commendation for the congregation. 1-10 Paul warmly commends the Thessalonians for their faithful work and endurance. The Thessalonians have become an example to other believers in accepting the word under tribulation, and with the joy that God's Spirit produces everywhere it is being reported how they abandoned idolatry and turned to slaving for the living God and are waiting for Jesus. Paul's example went among them too. 1-12 After suffering insolent treatment at Philippi, Paul drew strength from God and preached boldly to the Thessalonians. Paul shunned flattery, covetousness, and glory-seeking. He avoided becoming a burden to the brothers, but instead treated them gently as a nursing mother would and exhorted them as a loving father. Encouragement to remain firm in the face of persecution. 13 The brothers in Thessalonica, after accepting the message proclaimed to them as the word of God, were persecuted by their fellow countrymen. The same things have happened in Judea, where Christians are suffering at the hands of Jews. Paul has greatly desired to see the Thessalonians. When he could no longer bear the lack of news about them, he sent Timothy, and Timothy has just returned with good news about their spiritual condition. Paul prays for their continued increased admonition regarding attitude and conduct. 1 5 28 Walk more fully in the course pleasing to God. Abstain from fornication. Love the brothers to an even greater textoi acute miritra longo. Thessalonians, letters to the 1091. Background for 1 Thessalonians. Practically from the beginning, the congregation to which 1 Thessalonians was addressed experienced persecution. After arriving at Thessalonica, Paul preached in the synagogue there for 3 Sabbaths. A considerable number of persons became believers, and a congregation was established. Fanatical Jews, however, stirred up mob violence. Not finding Paul and Silas at the home of Jason, the mob dragged Jason and certain other brothers before the city rulers, accusing them of sedition. Only upon giving sufficient security were Jason and the others released. This prompted the brothers to send Paul and Silas to Berea by night, evidently for the sake of the congregation and the safety of the 2 men. Acts 17. 1-10. Thereafter, besides continued persecution. 1-2 14. The congregation seemingly experienced great sorrow over losing 1/8 of their number in death. 4. 13. Aware of the pressure that was being brought to bear against the new congregation and very much concerned about its effect, Paul dispatched Timothy to comfort and strengthen the Thessalonians. Earlier the apostle had tried to visit them twice, but Satan cut across his path. 2. 17. 3. Receiving Timothy's encouraging report about the faithfulness and love of the Thessalonians, Paul rejoiced. 1-3. 6-10 However, they needed further encouragement and admonition to resist weaknesses of the flesh,